So I have a question. If you have a piece of paper handy or a pen, I'm kind of old school, but if you just want to make notes on your computer, some people don't even work with pens anymore. I understand that. But yeah, just if you could take a few seconds to answer this question for yourself. And you don't need to share the answer. It just will allow this discussion that we're having today to have more meaning for you. So the question that I have for you is, what will make you happier? If you just take a few seconds and write down whatever comes to your mind, don't overthink it. Just write it down. Again, you don't need to share this. It's just for yourself. What will make you happier? Okay, so now I'm going to take you back just a little over 29 years in time. I'm going to take you back to London, England. Okay, we're going to go back in time. In London, England on July 5th, 1992. How many of you are tennis fans? Show of hands. Tennis fans? Okay, I see Brian nodding a little bit. Okay. I was like, no. Okay, but no worries. July 5th, 1992 was the men's finals, Wimbledon competition. Two finalists, of course. One was Goran Ivanovic. He was expected to win the tournament. He was the favorite of the tournament, and he was kicking butt. He was a tall, slender Croatian young guy doing really well. Here he was in the finals, and he was up against the American underdog at that time. And Goran was expected to have a pretty relatively easy final. But what happened is it went 5 sets. It went to the finish. It went the full fierce battle to the end. And in the fifth set, they were tied 4 games apiece. And the American underdog was up to serve, and he was able to, hold on to his serve, take the lead at 5-4. He's 1 game away from winning the Wimbledon's final. And if you're anyone involved in tennis, they start at a young age. That's the dream, to win one of the Grand Slams, right? One of the big tournaments. And Wimbledon is one of them. And here he was, 1 game away from winning his dream. But Goran had an incredible serve, and he's not going to let it up that easily. And with that, I'm just going to take you for the final minute to that. Just want to make sure that I'm sharing my sound here. Perfect. We're going to go back to
this championship, the last.
Just going to take it to the spot.
He wanted the same ball, retrieved the one that has been kind to him the last 2 serves. Oh!
I forgot to mention that the American underdog was Andre Agassi. Yeah. Up until that point, we all know he's considered one of the best players now, but at that time he had never won a Grand Slam. Everybody thought he was just all image, no substance.
Well, Andre waited till the last minute. Goran really had no play. Maybe should have guessed one side or the other. He just stood in the middle.
Right, please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Right, please. Game. Reset. 2, 6-7, 6-4, 6-4, 1-6, 6-4.
So, how do you think Andre feels? Obviously ecstatic. You can see the tears coming down his eyes. He's thrilled. He's happy. And, I ask you, what do you think will make you happier? this is a moment, right? This is a big moment. And obviously, it did change the course of his life in many ways. And I'm an advocate of goal setting in many ways. But what we want to look at here is the emotional level here. We're talking about the emotional level. And what I want to stress is that in his autobiography, which is actually great title, it's called Open. I encourage you to read it if you're tennis or interested. It's a great story of his life. But what he writes is within 24 hours of winning that Wimbledon, I'm going to quote from his book what he observed and what he realized.
This
So I hope you can all see that. I'm going to read the quote there. I'm supposed to be a different person now that I've won a slam. But I don't feel that Wimbledon has changed me. I feel, in fact, I've been let in on a dirty little secret. Winning changes nothing. Now that I've won a slam, I know something that very few people on earth are permitted to know. A win doesn't feel as good as a loss feels bad. And the good feeling doesn't last as long as the bad, not even close. What I want to emphasize is the dirty little secret. Winning changes nothing. And we're talking about on an emotional level here. We expect often that when we achieve certain things, whatever they may be, and throughout the world for that matter, a predominant message is if we become this, if we do that, we're going to feel more. We're going to feel more. We're going to have some lasting change in our life. We might feel like something's missing. We might be looking for maybe some fulfillment, something to fill the void. And that's what I'm here to challenge today is that true? We're taught more. We're taught to have more. And in itself, there's nothing wrong with it. But on an emotional level, again, I'm here to talk about how we feel and how we think about how we feel. We're taught that if we have more progress, more wealth, more beauty, more freedom, more optimism, more spirituality, if we chase all these various milestones, success, love, strength, fame, you name it, we're going to feel more and it's going to have a lasting change in our emotional makeup. And it's just not true. I took you back to 1992. I'm going to take you back to 1971 now. That's 50 years ago, right? 50 years ago. At that time, an essay was released by two social scientists, okay, Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell. And in that essay, it was entitled Hedonic Relativism and Planning the Good Society. I know it's not the sexiest title. Okay, they're academics. And they had brought forth this theory called the hedonic treadmill. And in my opinion, I think the world should have stopped at that moment. If it should have been taken a lot more seriously. And it still is by many academics, but it's more kind of brushed aside because it challenges a lot of our deep-rooted ideas, particularly around happiness. And the hedonic treadmill talks about our emotional makeup, and it shows that our happiness levels are fixed. So let me explain. They shows that on an emotional level, we behave very similar to our physical senses. So if you just imagine if you'd shut the lights off, we went pitch dark, as you can see on the screen, pitch dark right now, your eyes would adapt to that darkness. They would. Yeah, it'd be a little uncomfortable, but they would adapt. On a physical sensations, we know that. We learn to adapt to changes in our environment. Emotionally, it's the same. If something that we believe would be really, really awful happened in our life, we eventually adapt to it. And similarly, if something amazing happens to our life, we adapt to it. So let me explain. They did many, many studies after this, did many tests on this. And in 1978, they did this incredible study. And what they found, they looked at lottery winners. And you can imagine winning the lottery, right? Lotto 649, millions of dollars. You're going to be ecstatic, of course. But then what they found is that shortly thereafter, lottery winners were no more happier than they were before they won the lottery. Then they looked at paraplegics, people who had gone through a devastating accident. Just thinking, not being able to walk. It's crushing, right? They looked at that. And they found that they too, even though they would experience many difficulties, emotional setbacks, eventually they were just as happy as they were when they were walking. Now, I just try to graphically represent this. On the vertical axis, we have our happiness levels. On the horizontal axis, I have time. So just think of it. Before the lottery, your certain level of emotional makeup, right? How you feel. You win the lottery, it peaks. Of course, you're happy. Of course, you're happy. Happiness exists. But then eventually you go back down to where you were before. If you go through an accident, your happiness levels will drop, but eventually they go back to what they were. And the reason I think this is for me, such an important study is that we're told that if we do this, if we do that, we're suddenly going to change. Magically, emotionally, things are going to change for us. And it's not true. And the reason I think that the world should have stopped is that throughout our lives, we're taught that if we do this and if we do that, we are going to change. Things are going to get better on an emotional level. And it's just not true. So just take a pause. If you're single right now, whether you remain single or you find the love of your life, you're going to be just as happy. Whether you travel the world or you stay at home, you're just going to be as happy. You know, it's really, we keep looking for some magical, pot of gold at the end of the emotional rainbow, and it doesn't exist. Neuroscientists have done a great job. I mean, it's fantastic. We live in a really exciting time. They're able to isolate the neurochemicals that are released in our brain when we feel good, which we call happy. Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, these are released. You know, we exercise, we have a release of endorphins. You know, they've observed that falling in love, dopamine, serotonin. If you have a drug addiction, cocaine, dopamine. When you're having a nice conversation over coffee, you feel good with a friend, oxytocin. You know, but when you meditate, serotonin. Look, these are happy, and I'm not against happiness. Just to be very clear, I'm not against happiness. Happiness is an important part of life. You know, like laughter is great, right, Kathy? But my point is that pursuing it is really is what we're taught, is what we're reinforced, that something magical is going to happen when we achieve certain milestones. That's the problem, and it's a big problem, and I'm going to get into it more. Here's part of the problem. When people identify with being happy, usually self-identify, from what I've researched, about 5 to 10% of the time. You know, like, you're not happy all the time. You don't feel those endorphins all the time. They released in the brain and they go away. I mean, that's normal. So the problem per se is not that. That's not a problem. The problem is the perception that when we're not happy, something's wrong. Or when we're sad, when we're feeling certain emotions that are difficult, there's something wrong with you. There's a problem. That's the problem here. When 90%, 95% of the time you're not happy, you're not in the happy, those neurochemicals aren't firing, there's an issue. So, I mean, many of you know, what happened in South Africa, apartheid, was the institutionalized form of racial segregation in South Africa, where a minority white population was able to sway the political power to their advantage over the majority black population, right? Nelson Mandela and many, many freedom fighters, etc. That was South Africa. I use the word apartheid with the emotional realm because apartheid means apartness, to keep apart. And what we have in our world today is that we have an emotional hierarchy, an emotional apartheid. We have happiness supremacy in our mental and frameworks. And basically, if you're happy, those nice feelings are desirable. Of course, pleasure, pain. We want to feel good, right? But there's a problem with that. And I know it's hard, but that's the issue here. Is the problem is that we don't always feel good. That's the thing. And many decisions require us to also, which I'll get into, require us to push and get out of our comfort zone, which means we need to court difficult feelings in order to evolve as human beings. And as environmentalists and socially driven conscious people, you could appreciate that. A lot of difficult things have to be done in order to make us better human beings, which I'll get into soon. But basically, the mental health narrative, which I have a lot of issues with, is that it's about being happy. Follow a lot of it. You got happiness coaching, you got everyone, we got to get to happy. Well, part of the human experience is like a big portion of the human experience is not being happy. It's the 95%. That's part of being human as far as I'm concerned. And from all my research, you study the biographies and autobiographies of various people. Yes, difficult emotions are part of being human. And we have created very little space for that dialogue. Difficult feelings are undesirable. Let's push them away. Now, yes, sometimes they are undesirable. I'm not saying that. Sometimes difficult feelings are circumstantial. We may be in situations that we need to change. Great. But for the most part, there are a lot of feelings we have that are just part of being human, which is where I want to talk about. Unhappiness is deemed as a sign of something wrong. I have a tremendous issue with that because that's part of being human. When you talk about these words that are usually described for uneasiness, feelings that make us uncomfortable, let's say sadness, boredom, despair, loneliness, uneasiness, anxiety, depression, restlessness, or dissatisfaction. Try telling a close friend you feel anxious. They're probably going to say, well, what can I do? I mean, there's a problem. Well, not really. Moderate anxiety and moderate depression is very well known to be part of being human. It's chronic anxiety and chronic depression, which renders you dysfunctional and maybe not able to get out of bed or work. That's the thing that needs treatment. But moderate anxiety and moderate depression is very part of being human. But where do you talk to people about that? Where are you able to open up about that? Because we have condemned it. This is emotional apartheid that we live in. And it has consequences. So with that, I just want to have some questions for reflection and just open up for a conversation now. What's a difficult emotion that you've struggled with or are struggling with? I don't know if anyone feels comfortable to share in this small setting a difficult emotion, just as a case study. Yeah, Brian?
Um, even prior to the first COVID lockdown, I've been identifying with the idea of where I thought I would be by now as a man. And I was overcome by this sense of urgency to do like 10 times more in the time I had. And often waking up to like being like not even being close to even just being par, like just being like under the wire all the time, waking up with this sense of urgency, anxiety, all this stuff. And then, when the first lockdown came and we started going and all this, it was just kind of getting amplified, So, and then this whole idea of I'll be happy when I get 3 more clients. I'll be happy when all this stuff. I'll be happy when I finally get that government grant, right? Then I got the grant and then I was like happy for like an afternoon. I celebrated for a afternoon. So I totally resonate with how it lasts. It's like a fleeting moment and then you're back to kind of like digging out of a hole again. So that's kind of, I don't know if that shares what you're looking for, but that's been a challenge for me lately.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you opening up about that. I think it's for me, I can resonate with those experiences, those feelings, and as you can see, Agassi experienced a big fulfillment. You talk about the grant, and then within 24 hours, experienced the same thing. It seems to be a universal human phenomenon, and that's why I wanted to bring a spotlight to it. But going to the difficult emotions, so Brian, can we work with that and just deal with some of the other questions and just open up? And I invite every one of you to also just kind of maybe write down your thoughts as you answer these questions for yourself, because I'm not trying to direct the conversation necessarily. Any kind of endpoint is really to open up and see where it takes you in your life, these questions. Before you gave that emotion a name, like you talked about waking up, what was it? Are you able to, like, as a, I'm sure this will be easier for you as a fitness instructor, as a Reiki instructor, but you know, knowing the somatic experience and being in the body more so. But how would you describe it without giving it the name? Like you gave it a few names of anxiety and overwhelm and pressure. Those are words I may be, you know, paraphrasing a bit, Brian, but yes.
Yeah, like it's one thing I can identify with is it's coming up through the solar plexus, through the gut, and sometimes rising up into the heart. That's what I would physically feel. Another like sense I felt, it was literally right, like it was frequent leading up to the first lockdown, but specifically the night before we locked down, without me actually knowing what was going to happen next day, I felt like I was being hunted. Like I was being hunted down. Like it was the most bizarre feeling. So, but a lot of it is, as far as in my body, coming up through this area here into the gut and the heart.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Why did you give it a name? Other than that, I asked you.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, but when you were dealing with it, or you maybe still, right?
Yeah.
It comes and goes, I imagine. Uh, when you sit there and reflect on it or are dealing with it, I imagine you give it a name. So I'm asking why, like if you can figure out why you would.
Um, I'm just kind of throwing, what comes up.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Like,
We'll work with that. I mean, this is
yeah, like if you're in a situation, I guess I'm identifying this in my primitive masculine way, in a
perfect.
situation when you're dealing with like a physical combat or something like that, you want to square up with the thing that's coming at you. So by calling it something, that's how I square up and say, I see you, let's go.
100%. That's
Right.
great. What have you done to get rid of it?
Act, get help from my inner circle. I have a circle of men that I work with. I have people like on this call here that I other entrepreneurs, people
Wonderful.
that know what it's like to
Yes.
build your business. Anything that can get me into action towards the targets, towards where I need to go next, or to even just clear what I'm feeling in my body is what I'm moving towards. If I stay still and kind of go into a little cave, then it will likely get worse.
Hmm. Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. Did anyone else want to share any thoughts before we move on to the next part here? Carry on and build on what Brian shared. There's no right or wrong. Yes, Helen?
I can share a little bit. My experience when you asked for the first emotion was anger. And a lot of that comes from my childhood. Oh, if you have red hair, you have a bad temper. And so I fought against that for a big part of my life. Whether I was frustrated or whatever it was, I would push it down because I felt like I shouldn't be feeling that. And I've only come to realize just really in the last couple of years, when I've been doing a lot more inner work, that what that's done is that's now led to resentment, because I'm doing things that I don't want to do, because I'm not being true to who I am. Like I'm not owning the feelings that I have in the moment. And I'm starting to learn that emotions are just simply like a picture in time of how you feel. They don't brand you. They don't hold anything over you. You feel them and then you move on. But it's really been a whole life journey of not ever wanting to be angry at anybody because I didn't want to be labeled that way. So these questions were really quite profound for me to answer.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. Thank you. There is a whole language going back to the emotional apartheid, and a lot of my research, and I'm sure I know that all of you are well read and study and committed to continuous development from what I observe and heard so far, is that there's a huge language around judging emotions, as in toxic emotions. Many of us heard, we would need to process emotions. And I'm not saying that, of course, we move through energy and there is that reality there, but there's a tremendous amount of prejudice. And anger, of course, has a whole amount of prejudice around anger and what it is and what it means. And we should, we have this idea of the peaceful person in meditation pose with a smile on his face all the time, or her face. And there's all these ideas of what it means to be enlightened, and I find them to be very, very conflict ridden and not necessarily helpful. And that's why I've committed my time to sharing these ideas, because I invite you to rethink that ideology. How does it really help you to feel guilt and shame about things that are just happening, and as you can see, are universal human experiences, um, for the most part, right? So use the word combat, Brian. Look, fight, flight, and freeze is not a masculine reality. It's both. I go to a martial arts gym. I've been studying martial arts for 7, 8 years, and oh, some of the women there, they are incredible. You don't want to mess with them. So, I mean, we have within us a warrior element, no matter what, like a mother protecting her child, or a father. Like it's not about fighting, really, that energy, but really we take a stand in life. And I know many of you do in your own life. That is really that energy. But I don't want to digress here. I put this wrestling image as a metaphor for the emotional realities. When we have something difficult coming up that's, uncomfortable, just imagine wrestling is it like grappling sports. So if somebody's pulling you, it's physics. Someone's pulling you, how do you keep your position? You push back. It's equal force. Force in the other direction, right? Opposing direction allows you to keep your force, right? Uh, we all know that, right? So, and if someone's going to push you, then you pull in on them and you kind of maintain your position. So that's the same thing on an emotional realm. Is we resist when we feel that pull on us of a difficult emotion, we push back. And to Brian's point, and I agree, is that the labeling of the reality is our way of saying, hey, okay, well, what's the problem so that I could solve it? So how are you going to know what the problem is unless you label it and kind of, categorize it or put a framework around it, right? That's what we do as human beings, right? But the challenge is, and this is the problem from a leadership point of view, and I can speak from my own life, is that we create a lot of problems that are not problems. They're not problems. And we spend a lot of time trying to push on them and fight them. And I could tell, look back on my life, I spent a lot of my life, a lot of my energy has gone towards fighting problems that were not problems at all. And they had to do with these difficult emotions. Because I thought, oh, okay. And you can see people do this all the time, like they call it midlife crisis or whatever. Is like time is, you reach a certain point in your life, you realize that you're mortal. You don't, you're here, your time is running out, right? And you do feel hunted in a way, Brian. And the runway doesn't go on forever, right? So the plane can't keep you lifting off, and that's the way I did like to describe it. And so uh, it's inevitable, I'd say, and these difficult emotions are there in many, many forms. And what we do is we try to distract ourselves, and sometimes action. And I know this is a business network, and I'm an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. Action can be the greatest drug, the great distraction of it all. And it allows us to some semblance of control, and maybe that's good. But truly, it can be really draining to fight these emotions that are universal. They're human. And like I said, moderate anxiety, moderate depression is very normal. Did anybody want to add anything to this before I kind of transition to the leadership side of the equation? And anyone? We good? Good
I'm
so far?
curious, Kathy, if you have anything to add because of your work with laughter yoga and kind of the comparison between joy and happiness. Can you add
Yeah,
anything on that?
absolutely. Thank you, Helen. Yes, absolutely. I agree. I'm enjoying this so much, Freedom. Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah, so we talk about in laughter yoga, it's not about happiness. It is about being joyful, whatever you have. So not laughing because we have a pandemic, but because of it, so that we can be more resilient, so that we can, so because if we're totally in stress and fear, we're secreting cortisol and we're paralyzed. So laughing frees us up to kind of deal with the situation. Yes. I
Thank you,
don't know if
Kathy.
that was helpful.
Thank you. No, I think it will be helpful for the further conversation. Thank you, Kathy. So I want as an act, I identify myself in many ways. We all do, but a leadership coach, activist, educator, however. But this is where I'm going to now talk about the more get into the more of the manipulation here, because what happens is that when we deny these difficult emotions, it's not just about, yeah, we have to navigate our way throughout the world. I agree with Kathy. Yes, we can't be so cortisol ridden and that our immune systems are shot. We can't function. That's not the intent here. But I think that we need to cultivate what I call emotional toughness. We need to do this somehow to acknowledge the emotions. That's part of it. To talk more about it and say, look, yeah, I'm talking to you about the fact, like Brian was brave, say, look, I felt this anxiety. That's bravery. And open the space for others to say, yeah, this is a human experience, and not to be shut down by. I've had people do that on my social media. I go like, oh, is there something wrong with you? I'm like, no, I'm trying to open up some space in the world about these difficult emotions. And kind of work with people. We've got to coach ourselves and coach others, and there has to be some shift that goes on so that more and more people can understand these difficult emotions have a place. That we can talk about them without being branded as negative, as toxic, as depressed, as needing to grab a drug, needing help. Maybe you do need help. I'm not against help. We all need help, but for much of the time, it just means that I'm going through a difficult time. Just, like I am going through some difficult feelings here and I just need to go through them. Could be, right? So the problem is that when we don't do this, when we allow a world to continue with the message that happiness is the be end and end all, and that we should all be happy, the problem becomes is that we reinforce a psychological vulnerability in ourselves and others. And this psychological vulnerability opens us to mass manipulation on many levels. Okay. So here's an open confession by two very powerful, influential people in history. Okay. First of all, the first president of Facebook, Sean Parker. Okay. In 2017 was at a conference. This is Sean. He was probably just being open and honest, to be honest. I'm not trying to make him portray him as a villain here. He's just having an open, honest answer to some questions. And he went on to describe the thought process that went into Facebook and other applications. So I'm just going to read this to you for your own benefit. The thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them to really understand it, that thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? Interesting question. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content. And that's going to get you more likes and comments. It's a social validation feedback loop. Exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. The inventors, creators, it's me, it's Mark Zuckerberg, it's the Kevin Systrom of Instagram, it's all these people who understood this cautiously, and we did it anyway. Okay. Adam Smith. You guys know Adam Smith? Founding father of capitalism, modern capitalism as we know it. Huge influence in how this, and I'm not against capitalism or anything, but I just want to put this out here because it shocked me when I came across this in my research. This is from 1759, one of his influential works, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Quote, the pleasure of wealth and greatness strike the imagination as something grand and noble, of which the attainment is well worth all the toil and anxiety which we are so apt to bestow upon it. It is this deception which rouses and keeps in continual motion the industry of mankind. As environmentalists and socially driven people, I don't know what you think when you read it, when you see this, but for me, it was like, wow. It's this idea of success, having it all, buying, consumerism, mass consumption, owning, buying, becoming millionaires, having the crib. I have a history in real estate, bigger. All of this is a deception. It was a well understood deception by the founding fathers of capitalism and all modern mainstream, what do you call it, the assembly line. Adam Smith had a big influence on the assembly line as we know it. Yeah, this is what keeps it all going. It's a psychology. And that's why I'm committed to challenging that psychology because that's what keeps it all going. It's this idea that if I have more, I'm going to feel more. I'm going to get there. Like Brian said, if I get the grant, if I get the 3 more clients, like it's an endless, insatiable, constant running towards a mirage, an emotional mirage that never comes. So we get to the road less traveled, right? Or one of my favorite poems. So the road that diverged, right? At the wood. Well, there is a leadership road that diverges, right? And there's a big difference between feeling better and becoming better. Okay. There's a huge difference. And that's why I'm an advocate of altruistic based leadership. That's what I call it, is because it's all about becoming a better human being. It's not about feeling better. And there's a lot of leadership that's around feeling better and a lot of dialogue. And I feel the quest for happiness is really just about feeling better. And it's a very relative thing, what makes you feel happy. And for some people, as we've seen in the Me Too movement, I didn't want to really get into all that, but there's a lot more I could get into. And we've seen is that a lot of people in power, some very twisted, distorted things have made them happy. And there's a problem, right? There's a huge problem. The financial crisis that occurred could have been completely avoided in 2008 if it wasn't for these Wall Street bankers' lust for power and pleasure, which made them happy. So becoming better is a different path. And to become better requires courting difficult emotions. Okay, I'm sorry, that leadership path, that road, growth is difficult. Having somebody put a mirror to your weaknesses is difficult. Facing your gaps is difficult as leaders, as you well know. Empathy has proven actually, there's a lot of body of research. I have a colleague of mine who runs an organization, non-for-profit, committed to increasing empathy. And she's openly told me, look, empathy increases anxiety. Can you imagine that? We want our leaders to be empathic, but that also means that they're going to have to deal with more anxiety in their life, far more anxiety. And because think of it, you're gonna have to relate to another person's pain, to relate to their suffering. It's much easier and happier not to do that. To be empathic means to be unhappy in many ways. It's to open your heart to pain. Failure. To grow, we have to fail 100 times. To get better, we have to get back up. As they say, fall 7 times, the Japanese saying, get back up 8. That's not easy. That's not easy to keep getting up. It's hard. It's hard to fail. Nobody likes the feeling. Standing alone. Got to take a stand. Could be in your family life, could be in your personal life. We all know a lot of people don't like holidays, family holidays, because we feel kind of isolated at times, right? Confronting conflict, facing criticism, self-awareness, wisdom. All of this stuff has a price. And it usually often means stepping into that 90, 95% of difficult cortisol, I think, will increase, okay, in these moments. So you may need that laughter yoga in between to kind of balance it out, but you're going to court this for sure. So going to Helen's point, I tend to take a similar look, Helen. I kind of look at emotions as kind of like weather. Now, it's kind of both. So I invite you to look at it as look, there's thunder, there's winter, there's going to be snow, there's going to be cloudy days, rain, blizzards, avalanches, even maybe tornadoes. Uh, Things are going to happen. That's the human stuff. Like we're all like Bryce's point. We're all going to. Sorry, now your point. I'm projecting. My point is like we're all going to, of course, die one day, right? That's very tough, and we don't know when. And that's tough to fathom as a human being, and that's just part of the human experience, and it's really tough, but it's also very powerful to so we have to deal with all these plethora of emotions, losses, and death doesn't take just physical, it's psychological. We lose friendships, we lose family, we lose dreams. We have to let go a lot of things, and that's difficult too. So we're going to have these things happen, but it's not personal. And I agree, like it's not personal. But there are certain circumstances where we might feel some certain things and we need to change certain things in our life. So it's good to know that. And a lot of the time we're going to feel things that are just never going to go away. I personally, the anxiety, the it comes and goes, like, but it's going to go, and you can make a project around it. And I'll tell you, it doesn't work. You could say, oh, I'm going through anxiety because I'm not balanced. Yeah, good luck trying to be balanced. Or I'm not enlightened. Good luck trying to be enlightened. Go for it. Good luck. I've tried. I've meditated, and I meditate too, but I've really, good luck. And there's countless people that'll take you for a ride, trying to take you to that nirvana, so to speak, or that heavenly place where all your problems are going to go away. It doesn't exist. It's just a source of manipulation. It's the Adam Smith. It's the Facebook of constantly looking for your dopamine hit. And guess what? It doesn't last. It's not meant to. It's a neurochemical reality. It's going to go away. You can meditate, but guess what? If somebody comes and slaps you across the face, you're not going to feel good. I don't care how good a meditator you are. Before I go, I have one more tip to share, to leave you with, but I thought we'd open up. Are we okay for time? Are we okay, or did I totally over? We're good. At this point, I just have one tool to leave you with. So we could open up the discussion if you want, or I could leave the tool and then we could discuss. Let's do that. I'll leave the tool so it doesn't get left behind. A lot of us keep a gratitude journal. Any of you sometimes? I know journals are tough to maintain, but gratitude journals here and there. I know it's a tough habit, journaling. But what I invite you to do, and I've invented this, I haven't like promoted it heavily. This is the first time I'm introducing my new journal. It's the unhappiness journal. So you'll see me blogging more about this. Yeah, it's my gratitude journals are great. I'm not against them by all means. I think it's great to be grateful, of course. But I also think sometimes it gets a little pathetic. Like in the sense that you're grateful because you got food in your fridge. I mean, I think you got to set your standards a little higher. That's my only point sometimes. I listen to people when they talk about their gratitude, but I think it's just to feel the dopamine hit. But I'd say unhappiness is also important. That's why I really advocate the unhappiness journal. And it has a twofold purpose. So one is to describe your difficult emotions that day. The one that we call difficult, right? And our world tells us it's like wrong often, right? So just describe them, but create a space where you can honor those emotions without labeling them if you can, without turning them into a project that you've got to fix. just put it just like, yeah, just a place where you might not have anybody you could talk to in your life about it. So why not just write them down and acknowledge it? Say, yeah, this is a human experience. And I can tell you it is. Yeah, lots of difficult emotions, right? I'm sure if we are openly talk about it, we would all share plenty of them. So why not create that space for yourself where you could write them down and say, yeah, and they're there. And then there could be some feelings, that you might have that you're just upset about things. Yeah, anger, Helen, anger. I love anger. I'm angry. Yeah, and write about the things you don't like about your life. How come we don't do that? That's far more productive. Write down the things you don't like and you hate about your life and go do something about it. That's the last part. Make a smart goal and do one thing about it. Just go ahead and do it. And if you have other, like, this is just an idea, so you can build it your own way. It's a concept. I'm just trying to be a catalyst here. You can make your own version of the unhappiness journal. But the point is that it's just like, let's fight this prejudice and be more real as human beings, so we can allow other people to be more real. And that's all I really had to say.